So you might be wondering what your liver has to do with your brain function and your mental health. Well, I want to talk to you about it a little bit now because anxiety is a big problem and so is depression, and it's becoming a bigger issue in the Western world. And biochemistry, especially your liver function, can actually have a lot to do with it. You may not be aware, but the liver has more than 3,000 functions that have been documented, one of which is critical for our brain health. So let me explain this. So here we have a nerve, so we have one side of a nerve and the other side of a nerve. We have electrical charge coming through. When the electrical charge comes from one side and needs to get to the next nerve, there needs to be a communication that exists between those two nerves. And this is really done via chemicals. It's a biochemical equation that results in this. So in our, what we call our proximal nerve, we have a whole lot of different little vesicles that are formed, and these vesicles produce these things known as neurotransmitters or neuromodulators. And what they basically do is they release these chemicals out into the open, into what we call the synapse, which is a space between the two nerves. And by producing them and leaving them in here, these eventually make their way through these gated channels into the next nerve, stimulating the production of an electrical charge and firing off the next nerve. And this is how we conduct across. Now, the reason we do it this way, not have one long nerve, is it allows us to modulate things. So we can have a higher reception in this nerve that gets sent, or we can have a lower reception in this nerve, reducing the signals that are sent just by changing the sensitivity of these receptors. It's a really awesome way of altering the way that the brain works. And we can do this in a lot of different circumstances. The classic one you might be aware of is your flight and fight response. So in your flight or fight response, what happens is all this adrenaline gets released. The adrenaline helps change these patterns around. We also have an increase in what's known as cortisol, which sensitizes these receptors. And now we get a hyperarousal or an upregulation of all of these kind of nerve endings, which allows for quicker signaling and faster movement, allowing for improved safety, improved awareness, improved alertness. So this is why we have all these pathways with these synapses. And this is a very simple one, but sometimes we actually get several nerves that are all joining into one, and we need those signals to actually hit each other all at the same time to induce enough electrical charge, enough neurotransmitter formation to signal the next nerve. So again, this becomes a gating mechanism. It's really, really important in brain health and neurological health to be able to have this and control this very, very effectively. So one of the things that we need to understand is that once these little neurotransmitters have been put into here, they'll keep signaling all the time unless we remove them. So we actually have a clearance mechanism that actually drives and pulls these neurotransmitters out of the synapse, and these are generally enzymes. And these enzymes are all different types, but by having these enzymes, again, it's another way we can modulate how effective these things are at speeding up or slowing down nerve transmission. And this is a real critical function when we start talking about mental health. So you may have heard of these things known as SSRIs. And these are drugs that are specifically aimed to increase serotonin in the brain. And what it really is it's actually decreasing these enzymes. So shutting these enzymes off, by shutting them off, it allows for these things to accumulate, or serotonin to accumulate in that space for longer periods of time. And by having them accumulate for longer periods of time, the net result is we start getting this increased activation of all these receptors on this side, increasing that nerve function. And there's a ton of SSRIs out there. So drugs such as Prozac, Lexapro, these type of things are all SSRIs that are designed to increase the amount of serotonin inside these synapses. Now, the interesting thing with this, as I said before, is that we have our own system of regulating that. Okay, we have our own system. So it's a pretty cool event. So if we have a strand of genetic material coming through here, what basically happens at the end of this, we have these little tails that come off. And these tails are made of this substance known as histamine. And what happens with these histamine tails is that when these histamine tails are activated, when they're turned on and sparked up, it causes the genetic material, all our genes, to kind of get compressed and jammed up. And that's really important for us. The reason it's really important for us is because this DNA is, when we need it, is unstranded, opened up, and run through a factory called our ribosome. And as it goes through this area, it has the blueprint of those enzyme processes that we spoke about, responsible for regulating our neurotransmitters in our brain. So as it goes through that area, it's then manufacturing and spitting out all of those enzymes that we're talking about. So these enzymes, as we saw before, if we go back here, these enzymes are the ones that are responsible for clearing these out. So if we pack this genetic material together, it means the ability to produce these enzymes out of these factories reduces. So we have less enzymes produced. Okay, I know it might be getting a bit complicated, but bear with me. I'm going to write this right back to why your liver is so important in a second. So if we're producing less of those enzymes, it means we have more of the serotonin, or more whatever the neurotransmitter is, available. And as we have more of this available, it has a bigger effect. In other words, this mechanism is our own inbuilt SSRI drug. And we can turn it on and turn it off whenever we need it, just by compressing this genetic material and open it up. Okay, so this is a really cool feature that we have within the human body. So doing this, we have two things that really drive this. On one side, we have a process known as methylation. I'm going to explain what this is and why it's important in a second. On the other side, we have a process known as acetylation. And what these processes basically do is, this process basically compresses all our genetic material. It binds here, increasing it, compressing our genetic material, and therefore decreasing our enzyme production. Okay. On the other side, we have this thing known as acetylation. It does the exact opposite. So it causes an increase in the production of our enzymes. So let's track that back to where we were before. So if we come back here, what we're really looking at is methylation. As we methylate, we increase the amount of these neurotransmitters, such as serotonin, available, having a greater effect on our brain. And if we undergo acetylation, this reduces the availability of those, therefore decreasing it. So if we're talking about someone who has, say, anxiety, for example. If you have anxiety right now, this is what we're looking at. Here's our brain. This frontal area here in the brain, this is our frontal cortex, or our prefrontal cortex. Really what our frontal cortex does when it comes to emotions is keep us rational. It helps put the brake on it, helps control our emotional state. So it calms it down. So when we increase the availability of serotonin, we change frontal lobe activity. For a lot of the time we improve it. And by doing that, this has a greater inhibitory effect on our emotional state, and therefore we become less anxious. Okay? Also sometimes less depressed, depending on what we're trying to achieve. So this is what we're talking about. So we bring it back again. If we increase our methylation, we're increasing, I'm being a bit simplistic, but generally increasing our frontal activity, which therefore reduces our emotional state, makes us much more rational. If we increase acetylation, we have the opposite effect, reducing this mechanism and therefore increasing our emotional activation. Okay? So it's a balance between one or the other that is really, really critical for us. So let's go back to where we were here to our nerve. Okay? So we know the more serotonin we have, the more communication we're going to get, the better modulation, the less serotonin we have, the less the effect is going to be. So let's have a look at what methylation is and how it works. So inside the liver, we have this really, really important process known as methylation. So methylation is all about producing these groups known as CH3. These are our methyl groups. And the whole purpose of our methyl groups here is to convert a substance known from methionine to another substance known as homocysteine, and then to recycle that back to methionine again. It's this big circle that keeps running through your liver constantly. And what we basically have is every time we convert methionine to homocysteine, we produce our methyl groups. And these are the methyl groups that bind to that genetic material and pack it up, reducing the enzymes, increasing serotonin availability, and having a bigger effect. Okay, so in other words, this is our natural SSRI. It happens with other neurotransmitters, but we want to keep it in relation to anxiety at the moment. It's the easiest thing to talk about. Then what we need to do is we need to convert homocysteine back to methionine, and all we need to do that is we need to put a methyl group back on. It really is that simple. So why don't we just use the methyl groups directly from our diet? Because then we can't regulate it, which means this is always either flat out or foot on the brake. So we want to basically be able to regulate it, and the way we do that is by switching this on and off as we need to. The main things that regulate this, when we look through it from a biochemical perspective, is vitamin B12 and folate. These are the two big ones that really regulate this mechanism. And this is just not your standard form of vitamins. This is the methyl form. So what we're talking about is methylcobalamin and methotetrahydrofolate. So these are the methyl forms of these, the active form, the human forms of these vitamins. Then when we get to the other side, in order to convert methionine across, this really is an NADH process, which really is what we know as vitamin B3, and that's a real critical marker for that as well. So to push it this way, we need these two, and to push it back this way, we really need the B3 in order to do that. We have an alternate pathway down the middle though, which we convert homocysteine straight to methionine. This arrow is pointing in the wrong direction. And this pathway here that converts across is really dependent upon methylglycine. So it's the methyl form of glycine, commonly known as betaine or trimethylglycine. So trimethylglycine gets broken down to dimethylglycine, and as it does that, it releases these methyl groups, which allow us to convert homocysteine to methionine again. The whole purpose for doing all of this all the time, over and over and over, is to be able to regulate CH3 production, which means we can have our natural antidepressants that we can turn on and off at any given time. So this is going on in the liver all the time. But there's a few things in here that we need to be aware of that do influence this as well from the external environment. So for example, insulin and insulin resistance has a huge effect on this process. We know that stress has a huge effect on this process. So there are outside physiological things that do affect this as well. Even cellular energy can have an effect on this too. So what are the things we want to look at from an anxiety perspective when we start talking about liver function and regulating our anxiety and mental health with our liver? So there's a few key things that we can use to regulate that and get that working better in terms of supplements and vitamins and things. So the first ones we want to look at are, of course, folate and vitamin B12. And these are the things that allow us to produce methionine in the first place. And if these are low, we don't convert homocysteine across to methionine, and the net result of that is an elevation in homocysteine, which is commonly the case. And you can get that tested through blood work nowadays without a problem. When that happens as well, the next one we want to look at is our vitamin B3. So this is used to convert methionine back to homocysteine. Now there's an interesting thing that does happen in some people, and there's some genetic defects that can have influence on this, but one of the things that we often see that does it is some people have a low methionine level. And this is because homocysteine gets used for other things as well, and it gets burnt up because of genetic shifts. So in those situations, sometimes we actually do need to support the body with methionine as well. Now the key thing with methionine that we do understand as well is methionine is actually really beneficial for those with fatty liver changes. It really does help fatty liver. So this is one thing to bear in mind with this. Moving away from the whole supplement area, regulation of glucose is really important, insulin resistance. So we want to move towards a high fat, low glucose or low carb based diet. Okay, so let's change that for carbohydrate actually. Now this is a critical thing because not only does it affect liver function, but glucose control is essential for getting the proteins into the brain that we actually need in the first place to improve the production of serotonin and dopamine, and the future, or the further down the path of those things as well in terms of melatonin, noradrenaline, norepinephrine, and adrenaline, epinephrine. So we really want to be moving towards a high-fat, low-carb diet. Anything that improves insulin is going to have an effect on that mechanism as well. We can go on for ages with these type of things. So for example, ghee has been shown to improve insulin resistance. Berberine is another one that's been shown to improve insulin resistance. Chaga, there's a whole lot of different things that we can talk about that improves that mechanism as well. Then of course we want to reduce stress. Now there's a lot of different ways we can talk about reducing stress, but one of the key things that's really critical for this is we need to make sure you're getting good quality sleep at night. A quality sleep is everything. If we're not getting quality sleep, that's going to screw up that entire mechanism. In addition to this as well, other things that we know that will affect liver function as well to some extent is reactive oxygen species, or what we know as free radicals. So free radicals are formed from stress, they're formed from a whole lot of things throughout our day. So we want to really look at keeping those things under control. And there's a whole lot of ways, that's a whole nother discussion with this. A couple other things we know directly that'll help liver function. The herbs such as artichoke, which is a good one, and St. Mary's thistle, also known as milk thistle. So these are actually part of the same family, and most people aren't aware of that, but globe artichoke and St. Mary's thistle or milk thistle are part of the same family and therefore have very similar effects. They both help with liver function. One of the big things with artichoke though is artichoke is also very protective for the gallbladder and helps gallbladder function, as well as stimulating another pathway in the liver known as glucuronation. And there's one other thing that I want to talk about here, which is really, really critical for all this, which doesn't get much attention, and that is the amino acid carnitine. So carnitine is really critical. It's an amino acid that's used for the conversion of fat into the mitochondria to give you energy. So this one is really critical because some of the most concentrated areas that we have carnitine use at the human body right throughout is actually in the liver and in the heart. So carnitine is a really big thing, and we actually see quite a few people who have liver issues and who have problems with mental health having issues with carnitine, whether it be storage, production, intake, metabolism, digestion. So this is one thing that we can look at as well. So let's go back to where we started from with all this. Let's move back past our brain, past our methylation acetylation pathways, back to our nerve to begin with. So why is liver so important in mental health? In short, because it regulates your natural antidepressants. So the things that regulate your brain activity are generally derived from liver function. This is really, really critical for you to understand. The other thing we understand about liver function is the energy mechanisms are really critical for brain function and for cellular function within this area. And all of that really comes down to our methylation pathways and the regulation of blood sugars controlling insulin, which is one of the primary functions of the liver as well. So if you're suffering with mental health, please understand that your liver is a critical structure. It is important for your brain. It is important to have your stress levels under control. All these type of things that we've spoken about in every way, shape or form, but that is biochemistry, or are biochemistry, chemical factors that are critical in regulating nerve health, brain health, and your mental health. Anyway guys, I'm Trevor Chakouti from SpineWise. If you do have any questions or you want to know more, you have something specific you want to ask in this thing, please don't hesitate. Me and my team are always here to help you. Just post down below. Make sure you're hooking up with our YouTube channels, our Facebook page, and our Instagram account. There's a lot of information going out in all those areas, not just on this, but on a whole range of topics. I love communicating with you guys, so please don't be afraid to reach out. Anyway, I'm Trevor Chakouti, and we'll see you in the next vid. Bye for now.